My name's Kendra Lodewick. I see a lot of familiar faces. It's great to see you. But if we haven't met before, I am the mom of three kids with type 1 who range in age right now from 13 to 21 and ranged in age of diagnosis from 4 to 8. And I also have a mom that has type 1. So I am like the sandwich generation, I guess. I'm like the cheese that doesn't have it. And in any case, I'll have to work on that analogy. Lots of years of type 1 under my belt. And I love connecting with other families and parents that are experiencing this. And one of the, I would never wish it on anyone, but one of the best things that I've experienced after my daughter was diagnosed was just the community that you can develop and the support you can find. So happy to have you all here. And I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Boston, who is at OHSU pediatric endocrinology division. And he's been a camp doctor. You may know him as Dr. Snoopy for over 30 years. And so brings tons of experience as an endocrinologist, as a human, and as a camp doctor for us tonight. And I'm really excited for him to respond to our questions and just share insights and kind of lessons learned and observations from all of his years of experience. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself further, Dr. Boston.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, and yes, I've been involved with Gales Creek Camp for at least 30 years. I'm trying to think. It was 1989, I think, was the first year I was at a camp. So kind of makes me feel old. Maybe I am. So for the talk tonight, when Kendra and Rob and I were kind of talking about a topic, one of the things that I frequently do for groups is just leave it open to questions that parents ask. I can riff on lots of different topics, take as much time as we wanted to talk about those topics. And so I really want to kind of gear that toward the things that you want. And it can be anything. It may be an I don't know answer, but any question that you want to answer, I will qualify some of the answers. And of course, if it's an opinion, I'm going to tell you it's my opinion, because there's a lot of right ways to do diabetes, and we could spend hours doing that. So and then I think that's the most important thing, is just to realize that if we are talking about something that is care related, I'm more than happy to give my opinion, but your relationship with your doctor is important, and one size doesn't fit all.
Just a quick question. So our son is 8, almost 9, diagnosed about 18 months ago. And we've noticed periods of highs. And then, there's periods where he's, beautifully low and it looks great. I was just curious about, kind of growth spurts and how that impacts glucose levels and insulin metabolism and all that sort of thing. If there's any generalizations, or it just all goes cattywampus and we just need to realize the roller coaster is real.
So first of all, Rob's been working with me long enough to know that there is no quick question. My explanations can sometimes go long. So I'm going to summarize your question. It sounds like, what is the effect of growth on diabetes and diabetes control?
Yes.
And I think that's an important one, because as we go as kids, and I'm a pediatric endocrinologist, so my patient population is kids and teens. So that's just realize that. But as our kids grow, their insulin requirements will change. And initially, it changes kind of in a linear fashion. So as a kid gets older, proportionally, their insulin doses will go up until they hit that magical time of puberty. And one of the things about puberty is insulin resistance. So as the sex steroids are starting to be released into the body, and kids are going through puberty, that slope of the curve goes up. So as a kid gains weight through puberty, the rate of insulin increase, their total daily dose, goes up much more dramatically. And so that's one of the things that you're going to see as your kid gets a little bit older than where they're at now. So growth spurts kind of happen, but I'm not sure that there's such a big impact on diabetes as just the phase of the moon, the change in the seasons, the change in sports teams. Did I have a week last week where I had 6 soccer games instead of 1 soccer game? Did my friends yell at me at school and I'm really stressed? Did I catch a cold? All of those things are going to change insulin sensitivity. And you're going to see those peaks and valleys, which, as those of you that are experienced with diabetes, you've seen that, that it's a moving target.
It is a good confirmation that your child is actually sick and not just, trying to get out of something.
Yeah.
If their glucose is running hot, even though you've done everything you normally do, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, you really are sick.
I hadn't thought about using your CGM as a lie detector for whether the kid should go to school because he's sick or not. But yeah, I mean, that's certainly, I suppose you could. One of the things I always tell parents when we're transitioning into that sick day topic is the way the immune system works. You've got a virus. Your virus is starting to take hold. You don't even know it yet because it hasn't caused enough damage to you to make you feel ill. But your immune system is starting to ramp up, and all of the chemicals that immune system releases to do all of its job are chemicals that tend to make you insulin resistant. And so you might see a little bump up in blood sugars the day before somebody comes down with a virus. Well, the virus is already there, but the blood sugars are much more responsive to that than your actual symptoms are. I've had parents call me and say, my blood sugars are all of a sudden high, but he looks fine. And the next day, the little 4-year-old has an ear infection. So that is one of the things that you should think about if you're starting to see blood sugars that are running high. In addition to all of the other things you think about, like if the kid's on a pump, first thing, make sure that pump is working. But if you run through the gamut of everything else and it's just starting to creep up, it could be an infection coming on.
I have an 8-year-old son who just got diagnosed with diabetes about 4 months ago, 3 months ago, something like that. And he's pretty insulin resistant. The insulin resistance has been increasing, and he's interested in getting a pump. And I feel like I just learned how to do everything else. So as much as I want to get him a pump, I'm a little kind of apprehensive about it. But I'm wondering if that's going to help with the insulin resistance experience, because like today he was like around 350 literally the entire day at school. And
do you mind if I ask you a couple questions to get an idea of what
Sure.
the insulin resistance is? So how much does he weigh, and how much total daily insulin do you think you give him? Or you can give me whatever his long-acting dose is.
Oh my God, I have no idea. He weighs like 64 pounds.
Okay, so
his long-acting is 6 units, and then
Okay.
he gets anywhere between like 2 and like on an average 5 or 6 units per meal.
Okay, sure. So that actually helps me because, so when we're talking insulin resistance, particularly since he's only had diabetes for 4 months, I think we have to put things into perspective. A kid who's had diabetes for 4 months generally is usually in the honeymoon period. The typical kid, you said he's 8?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the typical kid who's 8, who is, and I'm doing math in my head, and it is 7 o'clock at night, so apologize for that. Is about 30 kilograms in body weight, and that would be an average daily dose outside the honeymoon would be about a half a unit to 3/4 of a unit per kilo. So again, we're looking at around 20 to 24 units of insulin would be an average dose for a kid his age, his size. Half of that would be a long-acting dose. So we're looking at an average long-acting dose of around 10 to 12 units.
Okay.
And so he's on 6. So my guess is he's probably still in his honeymoon. And what you're seeing is not increasing insulin resistance. What you're likely possibly seeing, if he's running in the 300s, is that his own body's insulin producing cells, the islet cells, are starting to come out of their honeymoon. And that's where I would encourage you to, if he's running that high, contact your physician, because he's probably going to need some insulin adjustments.
You're talking like the long-acting insulin adjustment?
Probably
Or
both.
both?
Yeah,
Okay.
probably both. What's his carb insulin ratio?
It varies. So like at breakfast, because he always gets high right at breakfast time. We're doing 1 to 15. And we're like waiting 20 minutes to eat.
Yeah.
And then for the rest of the day, well, his school doses, I think they have him on a 1 to 25 dose at school, which is now not working anymore because he was crashing right before lunch, but now he's not crashing anymore.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's too high, I think. And but 1 to 20 is what I dose him for all the other meals.
Right. So those are doses that are pretty low doses in an 8-year-old, typical of an 8-year-old in honeymoon. But if it's not working, it's likely that he's kind of leaving his honeymoon a little bit.
So I guess, yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. I was kind of what I was suspecting. Is this a good time to switch to a pump?
Good transition to the next pump question. The second part of your question.
Yeah.
My answer today is very different than my answer for you 4 years ago. So 4 years ago, when you would come to me and say, should I be on a pump? Should I not? I go, it's lifestyle. Pumps are another way of giving insulin, just like shots, which is better for your family. And a lot of people would choose pumps because there's a lot of advantages in how to give, but your ability to achieve tight control was pretty equivalent at that time. That's 4 years ago. With our sensor-driven pumps, you now have an opportunity to link that sensor to the pump, and that sensor-driven pump will alter the basal amount of insulin. As he gets insulin resistant, it'll go up. As he gets insulin sensitive, it'll come down. And it's kind of like having a parent that's able to adjust the insulin every 5 minutes. And I have parents that used to try to adjust things, twice a night, in between school and all this time. But now they get to sleep because their auto pump is doing it for them.
Yeah, I'm feeling like I'm at a point where I need sleep. So if a pump is gonna have me sleep again, because I sit up waiting for him to get to his highest point, and then I give him a shot while he's sleeping, and then I have to go to sleep and put all my sensors loud enough to wake me up for when he crashes. So
but see, that's the reason to consider a pump. Now, a pump isn't for everybody. I mean, I have patients that are staying on shots. I have patients that went to pumps and went back to shots. I have more patients that went the other direction and loved their pump. And sleep is important. I have an interesting side story. Sorry, I got bazillion stories. But historically, when CGMs came around, the Oregon Health Plan has an organization called HERC, Health Evaluation Committee. I forget what it calls. Anyway, I'll think Health Evidence Review Committee. There it is. And it was a time when we could not get CGMs approved by insurance companies, let alone Oregon Health Plan, because they were brand new and there was no clinical evidence that they actually improved A1Cs in kids. And actually, that was pretty good evidence that just providing an A1C or a CGM to a family, their A1C didn't improve in pediatrics. But I and another person went to testify to this committee because we wanted to see CGMs come on board. All I had to do was tell this group that this is a safety thing for overnight. And even if it's not demonstrating improved control, I have parents that for the first time in years were sleeping. Yep. So it makes a lot of difference. So anyway, does that answer your question about a pump?
Yeah.
And by the way, CGMs are a lot better now. So I think we are demonstrating a little bit of improvement in control.
Yeah.
But with the auto pumps, and again, sometimes I seem like a pump salesman, and I don't want to be because I think it's family specific. But with the auto pumps in pediatrics, on average, we're seeing about a 1-point A1C drop, and sometimes more. I used my mantra for years with families on shots or pumps. If they would come into my office and their A1C was less than 7, we're actually having a conversation about maybe that's too tight a control, because the risk of hypoglycemia was so much higher that the perceived benefit of decreased complications was being outweighed by the risk of severe hypoglycemia and seizures. And so we would back them off. I see kids all the time in A1Cs in the 6s now, on the auto pumps, with less risk for hypoglycemia. And knock on wood, I cannot recall the last time I've had a kid get glucagon, which is great.
I'm sorry, A1C, I don't know what that stands for.
Sure. A1C is a test that we do to measure the average glucose level over the last 3 months.
Okay, and what's a good level?
Yeah, so definitions. So 5.7 and below is what we consider a normal A1C. That's somebody that doesn't have diabetes. 6.5 to 5.7, that's pre-diabetes. Okay. That's somebody that doesn't quite normal, but they're at risk, probably type 2, at risk for type 2 diabetes. 6.5 and above, by definition, is what we use to define diabetes. The American Diabetes Association target range for kids is to try to get an A1C less than 7.5. And that's a moving target. That changes over the years too. So kids that have A1Cs above 7.5, they're above target. Now, I use words carefully here. That does not mean that an A1C of 8 is good or bad. An A1C of 9 is not good or bad. It is what it is. Believe it or not, an A1C of 12 is not good or bad. There could be reasons a kid has a really high A1C of 12 that I have to deal with and work with, but we try to stay away from the good or bad definition in kids. Target is less than 7.5. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you so much.
And so generally, when you go to see your doctor, the current recommendation from the American Diabetes Association is to get an A1C every 4 months. By the way, this is not shared by my colleagues, even in my division, but my prediction is that A1C recommendation is going to go away in the next few years, because we have better ways of determining what your average blood sugar is, and that's called a sensor. I use sensors way more than I use that A1C value anymore. That's an opinion, by the way. I should define that. But that's where I view diabetes going.
Add to that, just having, done shots for 9 months before we could get a pump. It does, if you're going to OHSU, it does take a long time to get an appointment for the pump because there's only so many available. So get on the list now. It might be a 4 or 6 month wait. And I will say that it made a world of difference for us.
As the person who has to recruit those individuals and try to get those diabetes educators, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, night and day in terms of management. It's
getting a little bit better because there's such a volume with these auto pumps coming out. Our educators got together and they decided to do pump evaluation classes now. And
good.
So the throughput is a little bit faster. Plus, we hired 2 new technology pediatric educators, and even then, we can't keep up because technology is changing so fast in diabetes that it's hard to keep up. And I would also say, I don't know where people are from. Are you guys from the Portland area, or is anybody from outside the Portland metro area? Where are you from, Angela?
Washington State, Olympia.
Oh, wow. Okay. Boy, we have reached all the way up to Olympia. That's cool. But we have patients that come from all over the state, and we have outreach at clinics around the state. And one of my clinics is in Klamath Falls, and it is so hard to get kids on pumps in that area because there's no experienced pediatric technology educators in that area. They've got to come all the way up to Portland to get it. It's a huge impediment, but we're working on that. So access and keeping up with technology is an issue, but that's a good problem to have, I would say.
To that point, can you speak at all to when the G7 might be coupled with like the Omnipod?
No. Yeah, that's the shortest answer you're going to get all night. I would say that the G7 was going to be paired with the Omnipod in October 2023.
Was going to be.
If you get my drift. We've been expecting that for a long time. And no, I don't get any inside information from the Omnipod rep and from Omnipod on when it's going to happen. We're hoping soon. The big problem, there's probably some people that are on Tandem Control IQ. The big problem was Dexcom upgrading to the G7, which is great. Warm up time 20 minutes, smaller, the whole bit. But what they didn't tell anybody is that they dropped the Bluetooth signal compared to the G6. And when they tried to get that to work with the pumps, there wasn't a strong enough Bluetooth signal to get to work with the pumps. And they spend a lot of time figuring that one out. They finally figured it out, and they boosted the G7 Bluetooth signal.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, does that then mean that your phone has to be closer to you all the time if your Bluetooth is weaker, or they fixed it?
No, they fixed it.
Okay.
No, that meant the G7s were still working with the phones, but they couldn't get it to talk to the Tandem and the Omnipod.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so even though when the G7 came out, they said, we'll have this done in a month or two, it took a year plus, and Omnipod's still working on it.
Yeah.
But the obstacle, at least for Tandem, it was that Bluetooth signal. And so Dexcom fixed it. And you might notice when you get a Dexcom sensor, grabbing my sensors, I don't know if you can see that well enough, but there's no line under the bottom here.
Mm-hmm.
And in your new sensors, you'll see a line. And that's the only way you would know that you have an upgraded sensor. And the reason I have ones without lines is because the Dexcom rep gave me a bunch of samples to hand out, and they were all the old ones. One way to get rid of the old samples is to give them to the docs to give out. So, yeah. But anyway, so hopefully Omnipod now at least has that technological hurdle taken out of the picture, so it'll start talking. And we also want it to start talking to the iPhone. That's what we're hoping. So,
thank you.
Technology changes. Those are some, and there's more coming. Okay. Other questions that people want to ask?
I have a question.
Sure.
So my daughter is 17 and she was diagnosed at 5, and she's going into her senior year. And I would just like to hear your advice for parents as we transition the total responsibility over to her. Like we're doing it slowly, you know, like just her last doctor's appointment, I was like, okay, I'm going to have you check in, and you ask any question you want, and I'm just going to sit in the corner and let you answer all, like, you know, let you do it. And it's kind of overwhelming to think of her going to college on her own and doing all this by herself. So what is your speech that you give to parents?
So you said she's a senior this year?
Senior, she's going into her senior year next year.
Okay, so she's a junior this year. Good, gives you a little more time.
Yeah.
But I think it's very appropriate to be talking about it now.
Okay.
And it is a nerve-wracking time for parents. I mean, it's nervous enough sending your kid off to college without having diabetes, but now you've been managing her diabetes for 12 years, and suddenly somebody else has to do as good a job as you can do. And I choose those words carefully, because I mean that is what parents want their children to do is just as good a job as they're doing to manage their diabetes. That's a pretty high bar for most kids to hit. So I think as long as you're acknowledging that, you're a little ahead of the game, because kids think that they're doing a great job. They're not as wise as you are. They haven't had as many years of experience as you are. So we shouldn't expect the same level of performance as you are doing. And that's where the patience comes in, because she is going to need to become independent and make the decisions, and she may make decisions that are different than your decisions. So you have to take a step back and go, does that really matter? Do I help her learn from those decisions? How can I guide her in making better decisions? And it's all good. A1Cs sometimes bump a little bit. Fine. Because what you want is at the end to have a kid who is self-sufficient, self-reliant, has a good sense of well-being and self-worth, and says, you know what, diabetes is not that hard to take care of. I can do it even when my mom isn't next to me. And the goal is to get that to happen before she goes to college, because there are going to be so many more distractions at college that are going to interfere with that. So stepping back and letting her make decisions. So part of it is, I don't know your daughter and your relationship very well, so I'm going to kind of give just general things, and you may be way ahead of this. But are you still counting her carbs, or is she counting?
She does most of it. I mean, really, I'm there for sick days and when
Right.
things aren't going right. I'm kind of her call a friend. You know what I mean? Like
Absolutely, you're already there.
Yeah.
You're not to the point of being comfortable having her at college yet.
No.
But
her driving is like, this is new, like within the last 8 weeks is driving, and that has been a huge thing for me to overcome. Like, I need you to text me. And this isn't like text me because I think you might be in a car accident, but like, are you going low while you're driving? Like all these things. So anyway.
Right. And you know what? And to be honest, you're never going to get rid of that. I have a colleague up here whose wife has diabetes.
Okay.
And he monitors her blood sugars constantly on his Apple Watch.
Okay.
And,
yeah, that's
and he'll never get rid of that. I can remember one of my kids who had lots of lows, went off to college, and mom was, I apologize for using this because we all are here, but helicopter parent.
Sure.
We all know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Her first week at school in the dorms, she was 60, and she did not at night.
Yeah.
And she did not answer mom's phone call.
Uh-huh.
So that was one of my 4 a.m. phone conversations. Mom calls me up. What do I do? What do I do? She's 60 and she's not answering my phone.
Uh-huh.
I said, she's at college.
Right.
You got to be comfortable with that. 60, first of all, is not going to make her unconscious.
Correct.
And you have to have some trust that she's doing the right thing. And you know what? We're parents.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to sleep.
Right.
True story. I have what I now refer to as my 2 toddlers on my phone. I actually have DECCOM follow on my phone. My 2 toddlers are my 85-year-old parents. They have type 2 diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
They're both on insulin. They're both on large doses, and they do get low every now and then. And guess what? When I call them in the middle of the night, because my phone's going up and it's 3 a.m, do they answer their phone?
Mm-hmm.
No. So I get it.
Yeah.
But she's an adult.
Yeah.
And so your job is to really get her set up to go to college. So speeches I give to my high school seniors that are going to college, I make assumptions that all of them are going to be exposed to alcohol. Whether they partake or not is their business. My business is to talk to them about the effects of alcohol on diabetes.
Okay.
And I have that conversation with them. I mentioned to them that, college atmosphere, it's all around. Just realize that you have diabetes, and if you choose to partake or go to the parties, this is what alcohol does. Alcohol slows down the absorption of food, sometimes makes it anti-absorption because it comes right back out if you're puking because you're too much alcohol. It slows down the release of glucose in the form of, breaking down of glycogen. So the counter-regulatory response is whenever you get low, there are hormones that stimulate the liver to make glucose and break down glycogen into glucose so that you bring your sugar up. Alcohol slows that down. So your risk of hypoglycemia is greater when you are consuming alcohol. Now, it's not one drink, but college students sometimes drink more than one drink. And so the example I bring up to them is they're at a party and they get a low blood sugar, and thank you for the auto pumps because I haven't had this happen in a long time. But if they passed out and somebody came to help them, they would assume that they're passed out because they're drunk.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I tell them is, please wear an ID band, your medical alert bracelet. I'm finding that kids are not wearing medical alert bracelets as much as they used to.
Right.
But I encourage them to wear that to parties, because if the police come up and they're passed out on the lawn, another drunk college kid, oh, this one has a medical alert. Ooh, this one has diabetes. I better get them to help. So that's one of the advice I give them. The second thing is, and this is from, I guess, my own college experience and with my own kids. People want to belong, so they want to go to the parties, but not everybody wants to drink, but they don't want to be viewed as the one that's not drinking. So grab a glass of beer and walk around with it. You don't have to drink if you don't want to. You can still be a part of that college life. So that's the speech that I kind of give them, and we go back and forth and kind of do scenarios, but just to get them ready.
And I was just going to add, I love those responses. I was going to add, as a parent who has 2 kids at college halfway across the country,
oh my goodness.
that it was a big adjustment. One, I think you'll find that your daughter is probably more ready than you think she is, and that she may think she is, even though, I think of that with our youngest, who was 13, and they absorb so much of what you're doing all the time, even before they had to be responsible for it. It's like osmosis in a way. And I have the sense that you already have set up sort of as Dr. Boston said, the perfect working relationship for her when she's not with you, as a phone. Like, I love phone a friend. We call it we're their backup. So like, I want them to have a backup string, and I don't want that. They're managing it all on their own, but I don't want them to be alone in doing it. So we have sessions through this parent forum about kids going off to college. So I encourage you to come to that when we have that, because there's lots of discussion about kind of best practices and how to make it less anxiety ridden, and how to help your kids kind of thrive when they launch. But there's a lot of conversation that you will have with her about what will feel comfortable for her. Like, and I think phrasing it as you do, as like, you're not doing it to hover, you're doing it so that she doesn't have to do it all on her own all the time, because it's a huge burden. And so whatever you can lift from afar, that's what you're doing. That's your intention. It's not to, it's not to track and judge and score how she's doing, but it's so that she doesn't have to be on her own all the time and doing it on her own. She can catch a break even when you're far away. So I think part of it is that, the way you each think about it. And there just with having Dex follow and there are other advances, like this thing called the sugar pixel you may be aware of, which is essentially, we have a really sound sleeper. Like, he will not get up to any alarm. And this is our middle child. He also has the most fluctuating blood sugar of all of our kids. And so he will be really low at night and not wake up to his alarm, to his phone, to anything going off. And so he has what's called, they both have like sugar pixels in their room, which are like this that's connected to their Dexcom. It shows their blood sugar all the time, and it is so obnoxious that no one can sleep through it. So there are things that will help you feel better, help her feel like less anxious about being on her own. And then you'll negotiate kind of what she feels comfortable with for support and what you feel comfortable with while she's, gaining her new independence. But I can tell just from the question you asked and the way you characterize yourself that you're already on a really good path to getting there. And I know that the other thing I'll just add is that, because I think this is a really stressful thing for parents to think about, and I remember thinking this when my kids were really little, and I was talking to my sister-in-law who had a child who didn't have type 1, thinking about when they're younger, you can't even imagine what it's going to be like for them to launch. And even when her child was small, she said, you'll be surprised, like by the time you get there, they'll be ready. And I think it happens for all kids with all types of lived experiences, including people with type 1. And they surprise us all the time with what they do, and will too surprise you with how ready they can be.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Kendra, I like one of the things you said about not keeping score and not judging, because we all can remember college days and how stressful it is, and stress is one of the things that makes diabetes really hard to manage.
Right.
And the first time that they're really on their own, even though they have a phone a friend, they're still on their own.
Yeah.
And that can be a real stressful time. So being there and supporting is really, really, really important. Little tasks I do, one of them is I really encourage families to let their kids order their insulin and order their supplies and do that during their senior year. So they're starting to get used to doing that. I have plenty of families that do it all for their kids, even in college, and then ship it to them. That's fine. But there is going to be a point at which they need to acquire that skill. So maybe do it while you're still around to help them. I like to put scenarios out for the kids to just test their problem solving ability. And I try to pick scenarios that they don't realize they're going to be in. And, well, I've never done that before. How would I know what to do? Well, sort it out. You may be in that. And one of the scenarios I like to do is they're studying abroad. In fact, Ken, we were talking about this a little bit with the frozen insulin, but studying abroad, and your insulin supplies got stolen, you ended up on the plane, you can make up whatever scenario you want. What would you do? And then I wait a long time for the kid to respond, because they're actually waiting for me to bail them out for that question. And I'll wait, and I'll go, no, let's work it out. He goes, but nobody's ever told me what to do. That's right. What would you do if nobody's ever told you what to do? And the one answer I always eventually lead them back to is you can always call, the on-call doc across the country 24/7. Even if your parents are asleep, there's always one of us that's trying to sleep, but is there for getting woken up to help solve that. But the phone lines are down. Now what would you do? And so what I'm directing them to is things like, I guess I have to go to a hospital and ask somebody. Sure, fair enough. You lose your insulin and you're in a foreign country and you don't know where the pharmacies are. There's always a hospital around somewhere, and they know what type 1 diabetes is. At least they can help you. And then we kind of go from there. So coming up with scenarios and seeing and getting them used to problem solving, I think, is really important. I want to transition a little bit here.
Before you do that, let me. This is very related to. We had a question in the chat, and it's.
I was going to go to the chat. That was the transition.
Yeah. Okay, good. But it's super related to this, and it's about teens who are sort of transitioning.
Yeah.
And when they get to a certain age, when they're 16. Basically, they can start making their own decisions about and they can start going to their appointments by themselves, and they can start 15, because this has just recently happened to us too, and we're like constantly asking our daughter, like, what happened at your appointment? And the information is very hard to get, and so this question is about that, and about what you've been talking about, and best practices in terms of. What are you telling our children? Are you helping them? Because this is Leanne, and she wants to make sure that someone is definitely giving her this advice, and you seem to be doing a really great job of this, but is there a best practice around this? If you know as a physician that the parent isn't in front of you, isn't sitting there, how can they be reassured that their child is getting the right advice?
Yeah, and actually the perfect transition, because I had just read that. That was what I was transitioning to. So I'm glad you're monitoring the chat, Rob. So yeah, so it gets around some of the issues of being a teen, and some of the issues about doctor-patient relationships that are tough for parents. The age of medical consent is different in different states. It's 15 in Oregon and 16 in other states. And at that point, we encourage parents to come in if the kid wants them to, but the conversation I am trying to have the conversation with the teen rather than the parent. So that's one of the first things. So even if the parent is in the room, the teen, we're trying to foster some self-sufficiency there. But we do have teens, like Leanne was saying, that want to go in on their own, and they won't share the information with their parents about what their doctor talked to them about. Again, I encourage the teen to do that, but I also recognize that that teen has medical rights. How do you know that the doctor has given them good advice? I guess it's trust, because you don't know. And that can be a difficult time. Now, most pediatric endocrinologists understand the transitions process of going from a middle school to a teenager to a college student and eventually to an adult. And I can't tell you where that adult comes in that process. But we kind of get it. I have plenty of kids who come in by themselves and struggle with their diabetes. And oh, do I wish their parents could come in with them and help them. But the kid doesn't have a desire to do that. They may even have a great relationship with their parents, but they want to do diabetes on their terms, and they may not be doing a good job. My role is to keep that person moving forward, even if it's baby steps. If I can get a A1C of 12 down to 11, that's a victory for the kid. I'd like to get it to 7.5, but it's not going to happen overnight. And that's a really tough time. And there's a phrase I use with some parents is when I'm dealing with these issues of a kid managing their own diabetes but not doing it well, is it's time to put on the seatbelt. It's going to be a rough ride for a few years, and try to reassure a parent that eventually kids' frontal cortexes do mature. They do become adults. And whether that's at 19 or 25, I can't tell you when that's going to happen. But my experience is those kids eventually, as long as they've got a good relationship with their doctor and their team, come back and say, you know what? I just decided I'm going to do it. And you know what? It's not that hard. I can do it. Just help me. And as long as we've got a good relationship with the physician at that point, there we are. Okay, now we're going to start making some progress. If they hate diabetes and they're, it's a bad experience and they get a lot of negative feedback because their A1C is 10, they may not reach out when they're ready to take that step and do better. So, Leanne, I'm not sure I answered your question completely. Let me know if I didn't. But that is the challenge. Kids are their own people. Yeah, there's a hand up.
So to that end, I think you mentioned this earlier, is there was a question around the health consequences. So say the kid has a couple of years of where things aren't super well managed or what have you. What are we thinking about? What are we concerned about? What are we, praying against?
Sure. So I'm going to put that into the general concept of complications of diabetes related to our kids. because we all worry about that. I mean, I worry about that. So just a few general things. I've been doing this for 30 years. I've taken care of kids from 5 months, well, actually neonates that were born with diabetes. That's a whole nother issue, but type 1 diabetes as early as 8 to 9 months, all the way up through early college. And, you know, once they graduate from college, I definitely transition them. They get married, I transition them. They get married at 17, I transition them. But anyway, because when they're adults, they transition. I screen kids for retinopathy, try once a year. Probably once every other year is fine for most of our kids. The ADA says once a year. They're starting to think about once every other year. 2 cases of retinopathy in a 20-plus-year-old of all of those thousands of kids I've taken care of. And kids that were really, 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 really out there poor controlled for a long time. 2 cases. No cases of nephropathy. No cases of neuropathy. Some cases of gastroparesis because of high blood sugars that can happen. But so the bottom line is, in our kids, the complication rate is extremely low. Researchers have been looking at this for a long time, and if they look hard enough, they can find some subtle things that happen in kids with type 1 diabetes that suggest there might be some impact on the vessels in the heart and other places, but they have to really, really, really look hard, and the clinical significance is probably not relevant. So first of all, for folks that are worried about their kids as kids, I would say let's take the worry way down for a couple of reasons. And one of them is just long-term experience. The second thing I would say is we're managing diabetes to prevent long-term complications as adults. And that's legitimate. So outside the kid area, let's set our kids up for good health long-term. And that's clearly related to A1C, also related to variability in blood sugar. So the more variability in the blood sugar, the higher risk of complications. The higher the A1C, there was a quote a long time ago that for every 1 point higher in an A1C, it's roughly 10-fold increase in risk of complications. So an A1C of 10 is 10-fold higher than an A1C of 9. It's not quite that linear, but just for illustration purposes. And then there's genetic susceptibility. So the unfortunate thing is some individuals are more susceptible to complications than others. There's something genetic about that. And that explains why some people that are poorly controlled, no complications at age 50. Some people that have better control, complications at age 30. That's history. So in fact, I was talking with Rob about this earlier. I strongly feel that we've entered a new age in that diabetes risk. And the reason I say that is our auto pumps can manage that blood sugar down into the 7s and 6s. I even have a couple of kids that frequently hit 5s. I still get nervous about that. But there's very few low blood sugars, and they're 5. Okay, 5.8, fine. So we've entered a new age. The complication rate related to hemoglobin A1C was primarily studied in those with 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, not in those with 5, 6, low 7s. The definition of diabetes at 6.5 was kind of put there to divide the risk of high blood sugar. We don't see risks in people with prediabetes. The prediabetes type 2s, they have other risks of cardiovascular disease, but it's not related to their blood sugar. If I can now take a group of type 1 individuals with diabetes and move them down around that 6.5, you know, the thinking is that their risk for long-term complications is probably the same as those that have prediabetes, which is not. The thing is we don't know that for sure. And we are not going to know that for another 15 to 20 years. So we need a whole cohort of you guys with your kids managing with an auto pump, 6.5 to 7.5 A1C, 6.2 as they're getting into adulthood, and follow them for 15 to 20 years and see what their complication rate is. Our prediction is that it's going to be the same risk as somebody with prediabetes, which, like I said, is 0. So I think that is very encouraging. I'm glad I'm still practicing to see this happen. But I'm going to add another thing is, we're not going to know for 15 to 20 years, and I'll guarantee you that diabetes care is going to be different in 10 years. It's not going to be the same as it is today. And so that cohort of 6.5 to 7.5, it's now going to be 5.5 to 6.5. The technology is on the horizon that will get us there. And so we're going to be setting up studies to look at long-term complications, and then they're going to be worthless studies because we're now a whole A1C lower and we have to start them over again. Well, I'm good with that. So anyway, that's a long-winded answer to your complication question. So I don't spend a lot of time talking with families about long-term complications anymore, because I real quickly lapse into this conversation that we just had. Said, I don't know what to tell you, which is good. All I can tell you is it's going to be a lot better than where we were 10, 15 years ago. And so what's on the horizon are things like I don't know if people have heard about the dual channel pumps. Have people heard about dual channel pumps?
Yeah.
There's some nods, and there's some, so we'll talk about quickly dual channel pumps. We way oversimplify diabetes when we teach people how to manage it. We imply that blood sugar is regulated by insulin and how much carb you eat and how much you exercise and maybe stress. Okay. Nah, that's just a fraction of the things that regulate your blood sugar. But that's all that we can manage. So that's all we really teach you. So in normal people that don't have diabetes, when you're trying to manage your blood sugar physiologically in a very tight range from 60 to 110, as your blood sugar goes up, insulin goes up. Well, okay, we all know that. But there's another hormone equally as important to insulin that's kind of the opposite of insulin, and that is glucagon. Glucagon goes down. As your blood sugar drops, insulin drops, glucagon goes up. And my blood sugar is managed constantly by those two hormones in concert. That's normal physiology. And then a number of other hormones that influence that interaction. That's what we're trying to replicate. The dual channel pumps will have 2 infusions. There'll be a glucagon infusion and an insulin infusion. And based on what your sensor tells you, it'll change the ratio. Now, the reason we don't have those right now is it took many years to be able to develop a room temperature stable glucagon that you could stick in that pump. Before, you would have to probably change that pump 3 or 4 times a day, the glucagon. But we now have shelf-stable room temperature glucagon, and so now they can start to develop the technology for those dual channel pumps. And they're out there, they're in clinical trials. They're trying to figure out the algorithms. And my bet, again, maybe I can predict it better than I can predict the Omnipod matching to the G7, but 2 or 3 years. I wouldn't be surprised that the first dual channel pumps are FDA approved in 2 to 3 years. And that's going to be my prediction is that's going to be the next big game changer. Maybe I should ask those around the question I asked you, Kendra, when we talked. My gee whiz question. Maybe it'll take too long. Maybe it'll take too long to explain the answer. Yeah. But so everybody that has diabetes, this is your question. You got a 10-year-old that you're going to give 15 grams of glucose to, and his blood sugar is 100. And let's make an assumption that 100% of that glucose is absorbed, 100% of it goes into the bloodstream, and none of it is used. It all stays in the bloodstream. It doesn't go into the liver, doesn't go into the muscle, isn't burned in the brain. Where is that blood sugar going to go? How high? So 15 grams of glucose into the blood. Doesn't go anywhere, doesn't get used. Where's his blood sugar? And I will take answers from everybody. And I may even have to call on you. And Rob and Kendra, you do not get an answer. Okay, who's first? You have to take yourself off mute. So we'll go with Eric first.
My guess is around 150.
150. Okay.
Experience.
Great guess.
I'll split the difference and go like 125.
Okay, 125, 150, and nothing. Would anybody believe 1,350? 1350. And actually, by the way, for Kendra and Rob, I just did the calculations just to double check. So I said it was over 1,000 when we talked, but 1,350. So your next question should be, well, why is it 1,350? And actually, somebody put in that is frightening. But no, actually, what it exposes is we way oversimplify diabetes. So as the sugar goes into the blood, it is immediately stored in the liver, put into the muscle, or burned in the brain. And the actual blood sugar after any meal or any glucose load is a balance of how much of the hormones like insulin push it into the liver, how much is being burned by active exercise in the muscle, and the brain just eats glucose all the time. Doesn't matter, it's a big glucose sink. The calculation to get to 1325 is just basically taking the blood volume and pouring 15 grams of glucose in it. And where does it end up? 1350. The blood is not a storage depot for sugar. That's the liver's job. The blood is a transport system. And our job as managing diabetes is to manage the transport system. This is where it gets really confusing, and it's fun to talk about, but I don't want you to dwell on it too much unless you're physiologists, because it will make you go nuts. But the reason, what happens, again, the blood is transport. If you don't have enough insulin around, you can't store it into the liver, and your blood sugar gets high. Okay? If you have too much insulin around, as the sugar enters the blood, it all goes into the liver, and you get low. It counteracts glucagon. So the point of this little exercise is nobody should be surprised when they can't figure out every single blood sugar that my kid's going to have. Why did he have a 300 at lunch? He's never had 300 at lunch. Well, you know what? It's because it's complicated. There's all these other hormones and things that are going around, and obviously the balance of hormones was to make his sugar go high. That's where he's at. I've had teenage girls who, their friends yelled at them, or they failed a test, and their blood sugars were 500. The stress. It's a potent anti-insulin. So anyway, it's kind of a fun, and we can go into at another time all the details. I have a lot of pictures on how to demonstrate all that flux, but that's why diabetes is so complicated. And if we try to predict what our blood sugar is going to be with 3 units of insulin and 25 grams of carbs, and it's always going to be the same, and why is it different? That's because there's not much sugar in the blood. It's all in where it goes. So 15 grams, 10-year-old boy, average 10-year-old boy, over 1,300. Unless, and that's only if his system is not working right. Okay? That make sense?
I love that. I love that because it just shows how difficult this is to control. You're just not really
Yes.
ever under. You just can't control diabetes. We can all do the best we can, but there's no way we're ever going to be in control
Yep.
of this situation. Yeah.
Yep. You can only control what you can control, and
Yeah.
the body is an extremely complicated system.
My daughter is at what we call kind of like the unicorn, right? Where she has this really rare I don't even know if you call it disease, but and our endocrinologist found it. So she had primary amenorrhea, and so they diagnosed her with primary ovarian insufficiency. And so she began really puberty at 14 through
getting estrogen,
et cetera.
Yeah.
And so I, in your opinion, I guess I am frustrated that the answer is we don't know why. Like, so, and we saw all the specialists in Seattle, and she had all her blood work done, and everything came back genetically normal. They tested to see if this was an autoimmune response. And anyway, so as a mom, I just don't know, and with very little medical background, I'm just not satisfied with that. And sure. God bless my daughter. She's just like, Mom, it's okay. We don't know why. I'm like, yeah, but why? Like, this is so strange.
So a couple questions for you. And this is one that, by the way, I really do have to give you I'm going to give you some ideas based on the information that you've told me without examining your kid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So take it for what it's worth. Does your daughter have diabetes?
Yes, type 1. Yeah.
Okay. And I will say my best guess from your story. So I'm just going to confirm she has primary ovarian insufficiency.
Correct.
So in other words, I'm going to ask some questions, and again, you feel free to say, I don't know, or I don't want to say.
Sure.
But has somebody said that her ovaries have actually failed?
Yes.
Okay.
Zero estrogen on blood work.
Right. And now again, I'm going to ask a more complicated question. Did they test the gonadotropins from her pituitary? I'm sure they did. I'm sure they did. They would have. Any endocrinologist would.
Yeah, I mean the tests were extensive. I mean it was extensive testing.
The beginning test is doing the FSH and LH and the estradiol, and if the FSH and LH which are from the pituitary gland are elevated, that's how we diagnose primary.
Yeah, so that's what the endocrinologist said. They're like, it's trying so hard to get things to start, and it's because those are so high.
So what I'm going to tell you is what I would have told you if she were my patient. Okay. It's related to type 1 diabetes. It's almost always an autoimmune disorder. And although when we talk about
have a great night.
Yeah. So when we talk about type 1 diabetes as being an autoimmune disorder, it's an autoimmune disorder that puts you at higher risk for other glandular autoimmune diseases. The most common one is thyroid.
Okay.
About 15 to 20% of people with type 1 diabetes eventually have problems with their thyroid. Second one is celiac disease. So that's why when you're always getting, kids are getting tested every 2 years for thyroid and celiac. Those are the two most common. Now we get to the really uncommon ones. Vitiligo. I've had a couple of kids with vitiligo. That's a problem with the pigment cells.
Okay.
So you get an autoimmune disease of the pigment, the melanocytes, and you don't have pigment. Addison's disease, which is a problem with the adrenal gland.
Okay.
Those are kind of the next two. And then when you go further down the list, you get down to ovary. Autoimmune disorders of the ovary. I've had two girls in 30 years that presented with autoimmune oophouritis.
Okay.
They had type 1 diabetes first, and they got autoimmune oophouritis, which is what you're describing. So that would be, even with antibody negative, the antibodies for the ovary are not real good.
Okay.
I would have told you right up front that this is most likely an autoimmune disorder related to type 1 diabetes. If she didn't have type 1 diabetes, I would be more confused about it.
Okay.
But with type 1 diabetes, that is one of the risks.
So you would say, so what I'm hearing you say is that your most comfortable explanation is that this is an autoimmune response, that this is why her ovaries aren't functioning.
Correct. That would be based on the information that you have told me. Again, I keep coming back to that qualification because I am not her treating physician, and so I have to be careful with the medical advice I give. But the general statement is that anybody with type 1 diabetes has higher risk for other glandular, and it's kind of a class. And, and actually, when we get into the more details, there are some individuals that get type 1 diabetes that are at higher risk for autoimmune disorders, other ones, and others that are less at risk. And there's some molecular basis for that, which is pretty complicated. But on the higher risk category is autoimmune ovarian failure.
Okay.
Even more so than autoimmune testicular failure, which can also happen. So, and again, when you put it in the numbers, again, in your family, it's an N of 1. It's 100% in your daughter. I mean, so that's the important thing. But, you know, of all the kids I've treated over the years, I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens of hypothyroidism and a few Graves' disease, hyperthyroidism, and lots of celiac, a handful of kids with vitiligo. We're down to 2 kids, two girls with autoimmune ovarian failure.
Yeah, and we definitely feel that. That's why I tell her, I'm like, you're like a unicorn, you know, and we laugh about it. You know, it's hard. I'm not to say that but we're just trying to make humor out of something that's really, kind of tragic in a way.
It is. It's unfortunate.
And she's almost 6 feet. And so I'm kicking myself because she's our first kid. And so I just kept thinking, oh, she's just a late bloomer.
Yeah.
And I wish it was our pediatrician who was kind of like, oh, she'll probably start. But it was our endocrinologist because she was 14 when she was diagnosed. And I said, she still just hasn't started yet. And she was kind of some blood work. And I just so appreciate that she was just on it and got us some answers and got us some help.
Well, it's an important, I'm going to say, teaching point. You know, when I'm training my fellows and my pediatricians on managing diabetes, particularly the fellows in pediatric endocrinology, I say, you know, teenage girls, you have to ask them about menarche. And just right up front, it's easier for the female physicians to ask the teenage girls, and they'll be more honest with them about things like menarche, even though, you know, I'm comfortable with it just because I'm a physician. But they don't always tell me. And the first one I diagnosed was my absolute favorite kiddo with type 1 diabetes. It was many years ago. And her pediatrician called me up and said, did you know that this kiddo hasn't had menses for 2 years? Oh, no, she didn't tell me. Well, it's because I didn't ask. And it's an important lesson for me teaching. Is in our kids with type 1 diabetes, we have to ask. Which, by the way, Rob, I will ask next time.
I'm hearing because, you know, my Boston is our doctor, and we have our own, you know, like autoimmune things that have happened that are not diabetes. She has celiac, she has diabetes. She also got a super rare thing, Guillain-Barré, which is like it's an autoimmune nerve disease. Like, it was awful. And so, you know, it just is, sometimes is what it is. And it sounds like your daughter, though, has exactly the right attitude.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so.
She's amazing. She takes it in stride. So, she's
and
pretty well with it.
We have hormone replacement, which, you know, makes a big difference in you know, going through puberty and developing it. The challenge is the fertility piece, and that's the hard part.
That's the hard part.
You know, again, my impression of working with kids in this, and your daughter may be further along than this, but when I have kids that have testicular or ovarian failure early in life, they grow up understanding that this is part of who they are. It's actually an easier adjustment than a kid or a young adult who's 21 who finds it out then.
Yeah, with the expectation of it, like the hope, the expectation of it, versus years of us talking about preparing for it, and yeah, no, I totally agree.
I've had many parents who didn't want me to tell their kids, don't tell the kids, and I said, let me tell the kids early.
Yeah,
it will make it easier. I know you guys are afraid, but let me tell them early.
Because we can make our dreams around that, you know, and all the options out there if she does want to have a family. And,
absolutely.
So,
absolutely. And there are so many options that we didn't have 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I know we're getting long, but in light of I hadn't heard about immune destruction of the ovaries or the testes. Since we don't have the same like landmarks, so to speak, in terms of male development, is there anything we should pay attention to or look out for to recognize if we had any testicular damage?
So I'm gonna start off the answer with that I have not yet found or encountered a boy with type 1 diabetes that had autoimmune testicular failure. And actually, for some reason, it's more common in the ovaries. It's still rare. And it can happen in the testes, but it doesn't happen very often. And so what you're looking for, and I think the corollary question is, how do we identify puberty in boys?
Right.
Because you don't have the landmarks of menarche in girls, but menarche in girls is happening 2 years after the onset of puberty. So in girls, it's breast development first, pubic hair second. In boys, a physical exam finding, which I'm going to ask you not to look for, and that's enlarging of testes from jelly belly size to peanut M&M size. And that's what we detect as the gonadotropins are being released and starting to increase the size of the testes. Second thing you're going to see is pubic hair 6 months later. And then what you're more likely to see is about 1.5 to 2 years later is the growth spurt and maybe a little tiny bit of facial hair and axillary hair and voice is starting to drop. But that's about 2 years after the onset of puberty. The most common sign that you might hear of is development of pubic hair. Because parents should not be getting into that amount of detail and examining the size of the gonads.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what you're looking for. So how old's your kid?
He's almost 9. He'll be 9 in May.
Yeah, and normal range of onset of puberty in boys is roughly 9 to 14.
Yeah.
So boys that are just starting to get some enlargement at 9, and boys that are getting enlargement just before 14. They're all considered in the normal range. 11.5 is average.
Okay.
So he's got a little ways to go.
One of the things that we noticed before he was diagnosed with diabetes, but in the months leading up to it, was an increase in body odor, like off the charts. Yeah. And then when he was diagnosed, it all kind of came together. It's like, oh, okay. And the body odor went away as things got controlled. But it's like, is he going into puberty already?
So it's interesting because I have not heard body odor as one of the things with type 1 diabetes. I don't hear parents talk about that, but I suppose the stress, if he had a predisposition to body odor, non-androgen related body odor, sure, the stress of coming down with diabetes.
And I equated it to, extra sugar being, released from his pores and the bacteria on his skin going, haywire.
I think your mechanism is good as any. And that certainly could be. It could also be, in a kid that is peeing a lot, is leaking a little bit of urine and the sugar. That can also cause some pretty significant urine-related body odor.
True, hadn't thought of that. But we also noticed that we were having to clean his toilet weekly, because again, just so much sugar in the urine and all the bacteria going nuts.
Yeah, and were there any ant trails going to the toilet?
Thankfully
not. No, thankfully not. We didn't have any ants. Knock on wood.
Historically, that used to be how they diagnosed diabetes.
Oh wow. We caught it early. We caught it fairly early. He was, he was above 400 when they diagnosed him, but he, I think his A1C was maybe 9. Not very high. So yeah, he spent 2 days in the hospital, mostly for them to educate us on how to take care of him.
Yeah. Well, back in the ancient days, the physicians would put the urine out. And
if
the ants would go and start, eating on the
urine,
it was a sign that the person had diabetes.
Yeah.
Either that or they do the quick test, and that was the dip and the taste.
Yeah.
No, I'm not doing that.
Yep.
That was the old dipstick test for sugar.
Yeah. Yeah. No, he the thing that really clued me in was he was drinking a ton of water, and that ramped up in a couple of weeks over the month of September. And I was taking the water out of his hands before he went to bed, going, "You're going to be up, over and over and over again." And he was. And then I was like, all right, this isn't normal. And I'm a veterinarian, so I have some clue about that's not normal. We need to take this in.
Right. And you know all about renal thresholds of sugar and all of that. And sugar's a diuretic. And it's a pretty common story.
Anyway, hopefully we don't get celiac. Hopefully we don't get Guillain-Barré. I don't want to deal with any of those. Diabetes is
but it is what it is. And it's funny, you always adjust. That is the funniest thing that I've learned, is you always adjust, and you end up back to where you think you are now, where you're like, everything's great, hope nothing else happens, but it does just end up fine again. And we know every gluten-free restaurant in the entire Portland metro area, and it's like we just know all these things, and that we've got lucky that Guillain-Barré is a temporary thing. It takes several years to get through that, but we're constantly like, nothing else, please. But you just don't know what you don't know.
Do you find that you have more home cooked meals now than you did before because of
she was 3, so she was 2 and she was diagnosed with diabetes, and 3 at celiac, and so we were still a young family. We didn't know what we were doing, so who knows what we would have. But I will say this: we probably, my wife is a very healthy cook and eating, and I cook too, but she makes me cook healthy stuff. Maybe wouldn't have been that way if we wouldn't have gotten diabetes and celiac and all the things. We could have just been eating terrible. Now we're pretty healthy eating family, so it's good for all of us.
You added 10 years to your life and you didn't even realize.
Yeah, probably.
It's probably time for me to head home.
All right.
Hopefully my wife is back from having dinner with her brother.
Awesome.
Nice.
Laura can come. Take care.
Thanks again, Dr. Boss.
Right. Nice to meet you.
Likewise. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.